I was having coffee in a quiet bistro in Munich last week with a man who designs the brains of German luxury cars. For an hour, he spoke passionately about European sovereignty and the urgent need to de-risk from the East. He looked the part of a continental elite, composed, intellectual, and firmly Atlanticist. But then his phone buzzed. A factory line in Shenzhen had stalled, and a proprietary calibration was failing. What happened next was a study in pure contradiction. The man who had just spent 60 minutes defending the values-based distance between Brussels and Beijing didn't call a lawyer or a consulate. He didn't even check a visa portal. He simply pulled up an app, booked a flight for the next morning, and sighed with a relief that was almost physical. "Thank God for the waiver," he muttered, his eyes already scanning the logistical data on his screen. When I asked him how that squared with his lecture on autonomy, he didn't offer a political manifesto. He just looked at me with a tired sort of pragmatism and said, "Values don't keep the turbine spinning. Physics does." That moment, the instantaneous collapse of political rhetoric in the face of industrial necessity, is the defining pulse of 2026. While the world focuses on the drama of American retrenchment and the loud threats of trade wars, a much quieter, more permanent bridge is being built across the Eurasian landmass. China's decision to extend its unilateral visa waiver policy isn't just a diplomatic nicety, it is a strategic arterial graft. It is the laying of tracks for a train that has already left the station, reknitting the world island into a single, integrated heartland. It forces a question that the bureaucrats in Brussels are desperate to avoid. Is Europe actually de-risking, or is it quietly boarding the only vessel left that still knows how to navigate the reality of global production?
That is just the perfect place to start this deep dive. I mean, you've captured the essential friction point of our entire modern economy right there.
It's this gap, isn't it? This massive chasm between the political desire, what people say should happen, and the industrial reality of what must happen to keep things working.
Exactly. And our mission here really is to unpack that exact tension. We're going to examine how China's unilateral visa waiver policy is functioning not as some simple travel update, but as a strategic arterial graft. It's a policy that is physically and functionally reknitting the Eurasian world island to one coherent economic zone.
I think a lot of people listening right now are probably trying to square what they're reading in the headlines, all the talk of trade wars and geopolitical division, with the economic realities they face every single day. They must be wondering, what are the actual gears turning here? What are the mechanisms driving this global power shift right now?
To help you get your head around it, we've structured our analysis around three core themes. First, we're going to look at the surprising and pretty dramatic resurgence of a century-old idea. A land-based geopolitical theory, Mackinder's Heartland, but completely updated for 21st century logistics.
Okay, a classic theory making a comeback.
A huge comeback. Second, we have to look at the cold, hard physical requirements for industrial resilience. We'll get into the engineering, the supply chains, the flow of human talent, and see how policy is, lubricating that whole process.
And the third theme.
And finally, we'll contrast the competing administrative systems at play. On one side, you have institutional inertia and procedural entanglement. And on the other, you have decisive, efficient execution.
Before we jump into those big theories and the hard data, I think it's really important to ground this whole shift in human terms. I spent some time going through industry reports, personal accounts, and I found a few stories that really put a face on this Eurasian gravity shift.
That's critical. Humanizing these macro shifts is so important. These aren't just abstract forces moving across a map. They're decisions that affect real people's livelihoods.
Let's start with a situation just like the one you described in Munich. We can call him Lucas. He's a veteran precision engineer from Stuttgart. For years, Lucas has watched the slow deindustrialization of his region. His firm, they specialize in these incredibly high-precision components for complex machinery, and they rely heavily on a specialized contract manufacturer in Shenzhen.
A pretty common setup for high-end European manufacturing.
Exactly. And recently, his firm hit a critical snag. A batch of components arrived, and they needed an urgent hands-on integration. A tiny, specialized element required a software calibration that only Lucas and his partner engineer over in Shenzhen could perform together. It was a classic failure of trying to transfer tacit knowledge over email.
And in the old world, the pre-waiver world, where the rhetoric of de-risking was backed by actual bureaucratic walls, how would a guy like Lucas have handled that?
Well, he would have been facing 3, maybe even 4 weeks of just waiting for a visa appointment, all while his high-precision production line back in Germany sat completely idle, costing his company hundreds of thousands of euros every single week. The political walls meant, basically, industrial death by delay.
A catastrophic failure point.
But because of the visa waiver, I saw an account from someone in a similar spot who described the feeling of just booking a flight and being on the factory floor in Guangdong 48 hours later. This wasn't just a business trip for him. It was a physical transfusion of expertise, flowing instantly to the point of greatest need.
That transformation, taking the delay from weeks down to hours, that is an unquantifiable strategic advantage. It directly sustains Europe's high-precision industrial base, which is built on these global supply chains and the need for instantaneous technical integration.
So the visa waiver basically turns 3 weeks of administrative vulnerability into 2 days of operational certainty.
That's why we call it a physical transfusion. It's literally what's keeping Europe's remaining high-tech production viable, completely independent of the political climate in Brussels.
It's pretty jarring when you realize that the industrial resilience of Europe, which is supposed to be the goal of the EU's strategy, is currently being propped up by the logistical agility of a unilateral policy from Beijing. It just flips the whole narrative on its head.
It absolutely does. And it forces you to profoundly reconsider what strategic autonomy actually means in practice on the ground.
Okay, now let's pivot to the geopolitical side. The impact of this reknitting isn't just felt in engineering labs in Stuttgart. It's changing the physical reality of trade on the ground. I'm thinking of a guy named Marek, a logistics coordinator based in a booming rail hub near Warsaw, right on that central Eurasian transit corridor.
This is right in the middle of it.
Right in the middle. Marek has spent his entire career oriented toward the Atlantic, toward the sea.
And the orientation has defined global logistics for, centuries? The sea was always the highway of certainty.
Exactly. But Marek now describes the Heartland not as some dusty old map in a textbook, but as the rhythmic iron pulse of the trans-Eurasian trains that are arriving every single day. He explained that, from his perspective, the traditional maritime dominance of the Atlantic now feels distant, expensive, and frankly, volatile. It's vulnerable to choke points and rising security risks.
Whereas the land routes.
In contrast, the land routes feel certain, fast, and constantly integrated. He mentioned watching French tech consultants completely bypass maritime shipping by flying visa-free into places like Xi'an to finalize land-based logistics routes for their high-value components.
What Marek is seeing there is a real-world geopolitical gravity shift. For decades, the certainty of global trade was dictated by who had access to the sea, controlled largely by Anglo-American naval power. But when the continental landmass itself becomes a fast, coherent, and reliable economic space, pulsating with those rail services, well, that traditional maritime dominance suddenly becomes a lot less essential.
Especially for high-value goods and for industries deep inside Europe, far from the coasts.
Right. The center of gravity is shifting away from the historically fragmented coastal periphery and toward the physical coherence of the world island. For someone like Marek, whose livelihood depends on moving physical goods, the Heartland isn't a theory anymore. It's simply where the certainty and the economic energy are now located.
I think the most powerful image he gave was that shift in perspective. He said the edge of the world is no longer the coast where the ships dock. The center is now this vast, integrated space of the Eurasian landmass, connected by steel tracks.
The center of gravity is moving inland.
And finally, there's the story of Elena, a policy analyst who spent years navigating what she called the institutional vetocracy of the EU. She described this deep frustration watching grand industrial plans get bogged down in endless procedural mess and committee cycles.
The paralysis of process.
Total paralysis. And she contrasted this sharply with the experience of a small group of Italian entrepreneurs. Their textile business was on the brink of collapse because a critical niche supplier had just evaporated. They needed an immediate, hands-on partnership in China to survive.
And how did the visa waiver policy play out for them?
They were just stunned by the decisive administrative execution. One day, the policy extension was a headline. The next day, it was a functioning reality. It was operational. It was reliable. They didn't have to wait for a reciprocal treaty. They didn't have to wait for some multilateral consensus among 27 member states. They just used that window of frictionless mobility to travel instantly, secure a new supply chain partnership, and ultimately save their business from bankruptcy.
And Elena's observation on that?
Her observation was that this is the stark contrast between two systems. You have the procedural paralysis of the old order versus a new non-interference realism that prioritizes just getting it done over ideological alignment.
That administrative contrast is so crucial. The decisive execution, which just bypasses all the political drag. It allows economic necessity to proceed instantly. It provides stability and certainty not through grand ideological statements, but through cold, efficient administrative acts that facilitate material prosperity. It's a very pragmatic, logistics-driven diplomacy.
Okay, let's unpack this shift in more detail. Let's start with the big geopolitical picture you mentioned, the resurgence of the Heartland. This isn't just about building a few new train tracks. It's about a centuries-old geopolitical theory coming back to life, but this time armed with new technology.
We absolutely have to start with Sir Halford Mackinder's foundational work from over a century ago. Mackinder introduced this concept of the pivot area of Eurasia, which he famously called the world island. This huge central region, which was impassable to sea power, was seen as the strategic center of global power.
And his axiom was pretty straightforward, right? Who rules the heartland commands the world island.
Who rules the world island commands the world. Simple, but incredibly profound. The idea was that a unified land power could eventually challenge the dominance of the great maritime powers, the British Empire back then, and later, of course, the United States.
And so the goal of that Anglo-American maritime strategy has always been to keep the heartland, this huge Eurasian landmass, divided, keep it fragmented and internally competitive.
Precisely. That fragmentation was key. It prevented the emergence of any single power that could leverage the immense resources of the continental interior against the maritime powers on the periphery.
For most of the last century, you could argue that strategy worked. The world island stayed pretty fragmented politically. So what's happening now in the 21st century that is so actively undermining that core maritime advantage?
It's the infrastructure revolution combined with digital integration. The tools that are undermining the old maritime hegemony, they aren't massive armies anymore. They're high-speed rail, robust customs unions, unified digital payment systems, and, crucially, the frictionless human mobility we're talking about. These are the threads that are physically and logistically reknitting the continental mass into a unified economic engine.
So China's strategic engagement with Eurasia through these massive investments and specific policies like the Waiver is fundamentally reorienting the region's focus. It's effectively pulling it into a newly integrated sphere of influence that's based on economic gravity.
That's the functional outcome, yes. This comprehensive logistical and economic integration weakens what Mackinder called the naval trump card, which has been the cornerstone of American global hegemony for so long. If overland transport and digital pathways, from fiber optic cables to high-speed rail, become more reliable, cheaper, and faster than sea lanes for high-value goods, the entire geopolitical priority shifts.
Control moves away from controlling maritime choke points like the Strait of Malacca or the Suez Canal
to effectively integrating and managing the continental interior. The game changes completely.
And if we look at the Sino-Russian dynamic, this is a huge component of that re-emerging heartland narrative. Their cooperation, especially through groups like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SKO, is often framed as a direct challenge to NATO and Western hegemony in Eurasia.
It is definitely a challenge to the traditional dominance of the North Atlantic powers, but it's also a very complex and ambiguous relationship. While cooperation within structures like the SKO is a clear geopolitical pushback against NATO's expansion, the sheer economic scale of China's engagement introduces some internal tensions for Russia.
Can you elaborate on that tension? How does China's economic boom actually complicate Russia's traditional influence in the region?
Well, historically, Russia sees Central Asia as its established sphere of political and military influence. It's their backyard. However, Chinese economic engagement there is now massive through the Belt and Road Initiative, infrastructure funding, deep trade relationships. This economic penetration is so profound that some analysts suggest that Chinese economic hegemony could become the first non-military step toward effective regional control.
Especially in those Central Asian nations that are now heavily reliant on Chinese capital.
Exactly. So it's not a military takeover, but an economic one. It's a new, modern version of Mackinder's theory, where a dominant power centralizes and integrates the pivot area, not through conquest, but through commerce. The dominance shifts from coercive power to economic gravity.
And Russia has to navigate this very carefully, collaborating geopolitically, while at the same time managing the subtle erosion of its own traditional economic influence in its immediate neighborhood.
It's a delicate balancing act.
The theory is one thing, but the physical manifestation of this integration is what really defines the shift. This isn't just on paper, it's iron and steel crossing the continent.
The physical connectivity is the pragmatic foundation of the whole strategy. China's objective here is fundamentally pragmatic: guarantee essential resources for its own development and build secure land paths for economic transitions that are totally independent of potential maritime interference or naval blockades. This is why the Belt and Road Initiative, and especially its flagship project, the China-Europe Railway Express, or CRE, is so critical.
The numbers on the CRE are, frankly, astonishing. It really paints a picture of a continental mass that's rapidly achieving a kind of physical coherence.
The statistics are just undeniable proof of integration. As of March 2024, the CRE had already operated over 87,000 cumulative trips since it started. That infrastructure network now physically connects 222 cities across 25 different European countries. This sheer volume of cross-continental traffic is tangibly reknitting the continent, establishing new arteries of trade, and providing a level of logistical certainty that just wasn't possible over land a decade ago.
And this rapid integration of goods necessitates the rapid integration of people. You can't move high-value cargo without moving high-value personnel.
That is the critical link. The personnel mobility, the visa waiver policy, is the necessary lubricant for this whole logistics revolution. Think back to Lucas, the German engineer. If a train full of advanced auto components gets to Munich, but the senior engineer needed to troubleshoot or calibrate them is stuck waiting 3 weeks for a visa, the certainty of industrial output just collapses.
The whole system grinds to a halt.
The visa waiver transforms political borders from hard barriers into really just administrative notations. It ensures that the certainty of human mobility dictates the certainty of industrial production. It removes the weakest link in the supply chain: bureaucratic delay.
Which brings us directly to our second theme, the logic of strategic personnel mobility. We need to look at this visa waiver not through the lens of traditional immigration policy, but as an act of industrial and geopolitical engineering. It's designed to maintain global production certainty.
That's the only way to frame it that makes sense. The extension of China's unilateral visa waiver policy to key European nations, running until the end of 2026, is a strategic act of engineering predictability into the global supply chain. It's designed to facilitate the rapid, deterministic flow of essential human resources. The engineers, the technicians, the advanced supply chain managers, providing that necessary physical transfusion for Europe's production-challenged economies.
I find the unilateral nature of the policy particularly insightful. It completely bypasses the need for any reciprocal political agreement, which, as we saw with Elena's critique of the EU, would probably get hopelessly bogged down in multilateral vetocracy and procedural wrangling.
The unilateral choice is its strength as a strategic instrument because it delivers instant certainty. For core European industries that underpin their entire remaining industrial base, think of French aerospace or the German automotive sector, this frictionless mobility is the key conduit for tacit knowledge flows.
Tacit knowledge, that's the stuff you can't write down in a manual, the on-the-spot troubleshooting, the institutional expertise.
Exactly. It's the knowledge required to maintain operational viability and innovation velocity. The policy acts to effectively merge Europe's specialized R&D capacity with China's deep manufacturing competence and scale. It ensures the knowledge developed in Stuttgart can be instantly applied and scaled in Shenzhen.
So in a way, this policy is functioning as the guarantor of last resort for advanced industrial civilization on the Eurasian landmass. It's ensuring that the lifeblood of technical expertise can flow instantly to maintain the integrity of these complex production systems.
That sums up the material reality perfectly. In the face of a political narrative that champions de-risking, which really means breaking ties, this policy is the material reality of risk mitigation at the operational level. You're mitigating the immediate catastrophic risk of production failure because of unnecessary bureaucratic delays. This is industrial pragmatism defeating political ideology.
This strategic mobility is also reflected very strongly in the deepening economic ties between China and Russia. The visa waiver policy acts as a major confidence signal to the business communities on both sides.
It certainly does. Russia's trial visa-free policy, which also runs until September of 2026, allows 30-day stays for business, tourism, private visits. And Russian business leaders have been very vocal about their excitement because they recognize this policy streamlines logistics and facilitates continuous, high-trust, in-person presence.
I remember seeing that quote from the Russian business leaders where they said something like, "A handshake, a shared meal, and tasting wine together build a stronger foundation than any email ever could." That just speaks volumes about the trust required for these high-stakes, complex trade agreements.
Especially in energy and high-tech sectors. Trust is the crucial and often undervalued lubricant for trade. The policy facilitates this by making regular trust-building visits simple and predictable. It enables partners to conduct high-stakes negotiations and participate easily in key industry events.
And the data we have confirms that the need for this mobility was already rising sharply, even before the policy was fully implemented.
That's right. The number of business trips by Russian companies to China jumped by 27% in the first half of the preceding year alone. China now accounts for 20% of all business trips by Russian executives, which is up from 15% just a year earlier. The economic gravitational pull was already accelerating.
And what's really revealing is which sectors are driving this dramatic increase in travel. It's not about low-value goods, it's the most strategic industrial sectors.
Absolutely. The most active sectors are energy, oil and gas, and high-tech equipment suppliers. Trips by employees in the energy and oil and gas sectors grew by a massive 58%, accounting for 43% of all business travel. And trips by high-tech equipment suppliers saw an even more dramatic 93% increase.
A 93% increase. That's huge.
It is. And these numbers are important because they show that the increased mobility is concentrated in these critical, high-value, strategically essential industrial sectors. This isn't tourism. This is industrial synchronization on a massive scale.
You can see it in specific projects, right?
Definitely. Take the petrochemical company Cyber. They're jointly implementing huge projects with China Petroleum and Chemical Corp, including the Ymir Gas Chemical Complex, which is scheduled to be commissioned in 2026. While the physical construction is ongoing, the visa waiver just massively eases the movement of the hundreds of specialized experts needed for technical commissioning, ongoing management, and complex IP transfer. Removing that administrative hurdle ensures the certainty of the project timeline.
The foundation for this mobility is, of course, the sheer trade volume between the two countries, which creates the context of necessity for all these trips.
The context is immense. We're talking about bilateral trade reaching nearly $245 billion in 2024. This commercial reality has made China Russia's leading trade partner for 15 consecutive years. This robust commercial gravity is the engine, and the visa policy is just the efficient throttle that removes friction.
And the expectation is that this policy will be a powerful catalyst that reaches far beyond just the big state-owned enterprises.
That's the long-term strategic goal, democratizing access. By removing a major administrative barrier, the policy enables thousands of small and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, to pursue opportunities more directly and nimbly. It stimulates economic energy and raises business prospects for the entrepreneurial core of both economies. It just makes cross-border investment easier and faster.
This is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. The administrative machinery of the European Union versus the administrative machinery of China. The difference in state capacity really defines the current reality of global logistics.
The contrast is truly stark, and it speaks to fundamental systemic differences in political economy, specifically how strategic decisions are made and executed. The prevailing EU discourse of de-risking has often been criticized as primarily a political performance, resulting in what some analysts call legal entropy.
Legal entropy? That's a fascinating term. Can you unpack that a little?
It describes the tendency of complex, decentralized institutional systems like the EU to generate vast amounts of procedural entanglement, which leads to organizational drift and inertia. The core issue is the structure, which often results in, as we said, vetocracy.
We mentioned vetocracy earlier with Elena's anecdote. Can you give a more detailed explanation for our listeners about how that institutional paralysis actually manifests in the EU?
Sure. Vetocracy is a situation where the proliferation of veto players, competing national interests, parliamentary committees, regulatory bodies, the need for multilateral consensus, it paralyzes decisive action. So a grand industrial policy, even one designed to boost European production, might get bogged down for years because 5 different countries argue over where a new factory should be located, or 3 committees debate the exact environmental compliance standards, or a single member state holds out for a concession in a completely unrelated area.
So while the EU is mired in this internal procedural paralysis, China demonstrates the capacity for rapid strategic decision-making, like this unilateral, swift visa policy extension that just cuts through all that entanglement.
Precisely. China's capacity prioritizes getting it done over achieving perfect ideological alignment among dozens of stakeholders. This approach is rooted in a kind of non-interference realism, where administrative certainty and stability come from cold, efficient acts that facilitate material prosperity, rather than relying on rhetorical commitments to shared political values. It's this administrative efficiency that allows them to lay the physical and human tracks that guarantee the arrival of the economic train. This prioritization of material prosperity and industrial reality brings us directly to China's forward planning, which is what defines the environment for the next half-decade, the 15th Five-Year Plan. This framework is set to govern from 2026 to 2030, and it's scheduled for approval in March 2026. The 15th Five-Year Plan, or 15 to 5, is absolutely essential for understanding the long-term structural strategy that underpins these short-term logistics moves like the visa waiver. The plan aims to achieve basic socialist modernization by 2035 and lays out the foundational principles for the upcoming period.
What are the key overarching principles that the plan emphasizes?
Well, they include upholding the party's overall leadership, ensuring high-quality development focused on technological upgrades, and, critically, balancing security and development. And what's notable is that current analyses suggest the 15-5 places an even stronger emphasis than previous plans on supporting the needs of key businesses and maintaining industrial capacity.
And what specific technologies and strategic industrial sectors are being targeted for intensive state support and accelerated development within this framework?
The plan focuses on what Chinese policymakers are calling new quality productive forces. This means supporting massive policy pushes for advanced semiconductors, biotech, quantum technology research, and massively scaling up their existing advantages in green technologies, specifically solar power, electric vehicles, and securing the rare earth supply chains that you need for modern batteries and magnets.
These are the engines of future global growth.
And the 15 to 5 ensures that resource allocation is centered squarely on them.
Given our earlier discussion about European industrial survival, I think the most important policy in the 15 to 5 for our listeners to understand is this focus on industrial resilience.
Absolutely. Industrial resilience is a non-negotiable key policy. The Central Committee has been clear in stressing the need to maintain a reasonable proportion of manufacturing within the GDP and aggressively optimizing and upgrading traditional industries. The message from the top is clear. The real economy cannot be lost. This confirms that while the Chinese economy is shifting towards services and consumption, the physical capacity to produce complex, high-value goods must be rigorously maintained as a core source of stability and national power.
This industrial imperative links directly back to the infrastructure. That focus on resilience and high-tech manufacturing leads us straight to the empirical data on the success of the China-Europe Railway Express. This infrastructure isn't just about trade, it's an engine for high-level innovation, especially in green tech.
This is where the physical reality of the tracks meets the strategic goal of the 15 to 5. The CRE is the flagship project of the Belt and Road, and it's playing a decisive role in reforming transport and driving innovation. We have access to an extensive empirical study that rigorously analyzed the impact of the CRE on corporate green innovation.
That's a fascinating intersection. What did the headline findings of this study, which used data from China's listed manufacturing firms over a decade, what did they reveal about the CRE's overall impact?
The findings, which used a pretty sophisticated model, revealed a strong positive effect. The CRE has significantly enhanced the green innovation capabilities of manufacturing enterprises. The overall coefficient was a highly significant 1.8563.
Okay, let's humanize that number for a moment. What does a coefficient of 1.8563 fundamentally tell a business person listening right now?
It tells you that enterprises with access to the efficiency and certainty of the CRE, so those located in cities along its route, are nearly twice as effective at generating green innovation compared to firms without that access. It confirms that logistical certainty is a powerful catalyst for technological change and sustainability investment.
The study went deeper than just overall innovation, right? It distinguished between substantive and strategic innovation. Why is that distinction so crucial for understanding the quality of this technological shift?
It's crucial because it separates incremental change from real breakthroughs. Substantive green innovation involves high-level, long-term technological advancements, often reflected in valuable invention patents. Strategic green innovation is more about reactive, incremental adaptations, often driven by basic compliance with short-term regulations.
So is the CRE driving real deep technological breakthroughs or just surface-level compliance?
The data strongly shows it's driving deeper shifts. The impact was significantly stronger on substantive green innovation, with a coefficient of 1.4873. The fact that the CRE promotes higher-level invention patents confirms it's contributing to long-term structural upgrades and genuine technological shifts, not just quick fixes.
So we know the CRE is boosting high-quality green innovation. The next question is how? What are the two distinct mechanisms the research identified that link a physical rail line to a company's innovation capability?
The first mechanism is the alleviation of financial constraints. Green innovation, especially the substantive, high-level kind, requires massive, consistent R&D capital investment. For many firms, securing this capital is the biggest hurdle.
So how does better logistics translate into more cash for R&D?
It's multi-layered. First, the CRE helps firms reduce direct operational costs by radically improving logistics efficiency. That immediately enhances their internal cash flow. Second, the political signaling of the CRE, it being a massive national strategy, acts as a signal of implicit government support. This positive signal improves the firm's creditworthiness, enabling them to access external capital for R&D more cheaply.
And the study could actually quantify this?
Yes, absolutely. The data showed that the CRE positively impacts financial constraints, and this alleviation of constraints, in turn, correlates extremely strongly with green innovation. Logistical efficiency is basically a financial instrument in disguise.
That's a powerful link. What about the second mechanism?
The second mechanism is facilitating innovation factor mobility. The CRE is more than a goods conduit. It's a logistics platform for the cross-border flow of technology, human talent, information, and capital. It breaks down geographical barriers and promotes the efficient circulation of these critical factors, which is essential for advanced innovation.
So it's not just the hardware of the rail, but the soft power of connectivity that allows specialized knowledge and human expertise to circulate quickly.
Exactly. This rapid mobility allows firms to gain access to new global knowledge and advanced technology. We see this in tangible examples, like the Xi'an International Trade and Logistics Park attracting European tech firms for joint R&D, or the China-Germany SME Cooperation Park in Chengdu facilitating these cross-border flows.
And the data supports the strength of this knowledge transfer mechanism too.
It does. The study confirmed that the CRE significantly enhances the flow of these innovation factors, which then positively impacts green innovation. The conclusion is clear. The CRE is not just a trade corridor. It is a dynamic platform that actively creates and sustains cross-regional innovation ecosystems.
Now let's talk about who benefits most, because the detailed heterogeneity analysis in the study shows the impact of the CRE is far from uniform. This reveals a lot about industrial structure. Who are the primary winners?
The analysis gives us incredible clarity on this. First, let's look at ownership. Non-state-owned enterprises, or NSOEs, benefit significantly more than state-owned enterprises, SOEs. The coefficient for NSOEs was a highly significant 2.2191, whereas there was no statistically significant effect for SOEs.
That's pretty counterintuitive. Why would the state-owned firms, which are often the initial recipients of state strategy, fail to leverage the CRE while private firms are thriving?
It all comes down to superior resource allocation efficiency and flexibility in the private sector. Private firms are just better equipped to rapidly adapt their strategy, invest quickly, and respond to the market opportunities the CRE provides. SOEs, on the other hand, often struggle with deep institutional inertia and slower decision cycles.
Next, the degree of internationalization. Does the CRE mainly help the big globalized companies, or is it a ladder for smaller, domestically focused firms?
It's the latter. Firms with a low degree of internationalization show a significant improvement, with a coefficient of 1.9111. Critically, firms that were already highly internationalized did not show a statistically significant effect.
So the CRE acts as a vital external catalyst for firms that were previously constrained by high barriers to entry.
Exactly. For these less internationalized firms, the CRE provides crucial initial access to reliable international logistics and exposes them to foreign innovation systems. For firms that were already highly globalized, the marginal benefit of just one more logistics avenue is smaller.
And what about firm size? Is it the giants or the nimble small players who are winning?
Smaller firms show a more pronounced benefit, with a coefficient of 1.7377 compared to larger firms.
So the smaller firms leverage their agility and they benefit more from the reduction in trade-related costs.
That's the key. Small firms gain higher marginal returns from the improved logistics. This cost saving enables them to reach new markets and, crucially, reinvest those saved profits into environmentally friendly R&D.
The regional differences are often the most telling. Where is the CRE having the most profound effect?
The regional disparities are dramatic. The impact is strongest, by a long margin, in the central region, showing a massive coefficient of 4.5971. This is followed by the eastern region, and crucially, there was no statistically significant effect found in the western region.
Let's dwell on that central region finding for a moment. A coefficient of 4.5971 is immense. Why is the impact so overwhelming there compared to the East, which is the traditional industrial heartland?
The central region is perfectly positioned to capitalize on this because it acts as the primary transitional and integration hub. It sits geographically between the developed eastern coastal regions and the Eurasian land bridge to Europe. This positioning allows it to effectively leverage the new connectivity, transforming it into a high-capacity logistics and technology transfer hub that connects both ends of the continent.
And the lack of effect in the West just underscores the structural challenges there.
Exactly. For the Western regions, just reducing transportation cost isn't enough to overcome the fundamental structural deficits needed to translate that into competitive, high-level green innovation.
And finally, let's look at industry type. This links right back to the 15th Five-Year Plan's focus on technology. Which sectors are innovating fastest because of the CRE?
The effect is strongest and most strategically relevant in high-tech manufacturing, with a coefficient of 3.1125. This is followed by medium tech and then traditional manufacturing.
Which confirms that high-tech firms are the most sensitive to supply chain certainty. They rely heavily on timely access to international technological components and specialized materials that the CRE guarantees.
They do, and they are also under the most intense global competitive pressure to continuously upgrade. This makes them the most likely and most capable firms to immediately exploit the CRE's logistical advantages for deep, substantive green innovation. The entire body of evidence confirms the CRE is not just a trade route. It is actively shaping the industrial future of the Eurasian landmass.
This incredible synergy between infrastructure, technology, and policy brings us to our final view: fostering resilient Eurasian cooperation. While we've highlighted the strategic benefits for the East, the EU is clearly taking a rational, multidimensional approach to engagement, despite all the political rhetoric.
The EU's underlying strategy, if you put aside the political noise of de-risking, is fundamentally rooted in reality. Deepening China-EU supply chain cooperation is viewed by industrial planners as a necessary move to achieve true diversification and reinforce supply chain resilience, especially after geopolitical shocks like the Ukraine crisis exposed major vulnerabilities.
And the reliance on critical raw materials is just too absolute for Europe to simply ignore or unilaterally suffer.
It is an unassailable fact. The EU relies on China for over 90% of its total rare earth demand materials, essential for everything from EVs to wind turbines. The ongoing effort to upgrade the mechanism governing rare earth exports is a critical step in strengthening the foundation for the EU's strategic industrial sector. Physical and material reality has to dictate policy.
Within Europe, we're seeing certain nations strategically positioning themselves to become integral hubs in this reknitting of the continent. Hungary, due to its location, is emerging as a critical nexus in Chinese-European logistics.
That's absolutely correct. Hungary is benefiting immensely due to its favorable geographic position, mature logistics facilities, and a decidedly business-friendly regulatory environment that contrasts with the administrative drag we talked about. This is shown by the explosive growth of rail freight through the East-West Gate Logistics Center in Budapest, which is becoming a core node in the CRE network.
And it's not just the physical infrastructure that makes Hungary attractive, it's the digital and management layer being implemented there as well.
Precisely. Chinese businesses are actively investing in and promoting advanced digital logistics management systems in Hungary. These projects contribute significantly to transport efficiency, dramatically lowering supply chain costs. They include capabilities like real-time cargo tracking, intelligent warehouses, and dynamic dispatch systems. This digital evolution aligns perfectly with the EU's own 2023 Strategic Foresight Report, which explicitly endorses developing regional logistics hubs and digital management platforms.
So if the ultimate goal is genuinely resilient and mutually beneficial cooperation, what are the key areas where both sides, China and the EU, should focus their collaborative efforts?
First, they have to focus on enhancing supply chain finance innovation. This means promoting new financial instruments specifically designed for this high-volume rail transport at crucial hubs like Budapest. This innovation speeds up the flow of capital and stabilizes high-value supply chains.
And second, focusing on the physical and systems resilience itself.
Yes. Resilience development requires optimizing both rail and highway systems, creating robust multimodal transport solutions, and the further digital transformation of logistics along the entire CRE route. These actions enhance the supply chain's ability to withstand external shocks, which echoes the EU's own stated strategic priorities.
And finally, overcoming the institutional barriers we highlighted earlier.
That is perhaps the most vital step, increasing policy coordination and strategic mutual trust. This requires harmonizing technical standards, simplifying customs procedures, and aligning product certifications to eliminate those institutional barriers and dramatically improve operational efficiency and certainty for businesses on both continents.
Ultimately, the evidence and the data suggest that the enduring partnership between China and the EU is one of profound mutual benefit, where the areas of complementarity far outweigh any fundamental conflicts of interest.
That is the concluding argument based on material reality. The last 50 years have shown the inherent advantages of this complementarity. Europe's advanced R&D combined with China's manufacturing depth and logistical supremacy. Future cooperation in green energy and digital technologies is seen not just as beneficial, but as absolutely essential. This collaboration is what will help the EU achieve genuine strategic autonomy, meaning the capacity to act, while also safeguarding supply chain stability across the entire Eurasian continent.
The ultimate takeaway from this deep dive is the confirmed triumph of non-interference realism. In the decisive moment of 2026, the global gravitational center is refocusing on the Eurasian landmass. Material necessity, epitomized by the visa waiver and the physical arteries of the CRE, has decisively overcome political posturing. The integration of production hubs and the frictionless facilitation of knowledge exchange across the steppe and the rail lines define the only predictable path toward future industrial stability and prosperity.